I'm Kimberly C. Paul. As I travel throughout each state, I realize that death is just a moment. It is how we live until that moment that matters. Finding connection with friends, family, and complete strangers. Journey with me. This is the Live Well, Die Well Tour. Everybody, welcome to Death by Design podcast. It's Kimberly Paul, and I'm here today with Olga Nikolajev. I've just learned how to speak her last name from Russia, and it was really interesting. Prior to the podcast, we were talking about your Russian heritage, which I'm always interested in, especially during these times of immigration and just getting to know that in the world, we all tend to seem like a melting pot. But welcome to the show, and I'm really happy to finally come face to face with you. You were the one person that has like one of the 200 hard copy books of mine, so I really greatly appreciate your support. But welcome to Death by Design podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Kimberly. I've been my desire to be here and have this conversation with you and to highlight of some of the really neat stuff that's going on here in Canada and that I'm part of. So thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. You know, I always like to start my podcast with asking people how they were attracted or how they stumbled, like myself, into this field that I now love. But what inspired you to work in the field of nursing, because you are a nurse, and become part of this whole death education and, in a way, a positive education movement too?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Good question, Kimberly. I had been asked that at another podcast, sort of, how did you come to be? And I don't think it's anything that we kind of think about as we're growing up. I wonder, what would I want to be? I actually didn't even want to be a nurse. I didn't actually want to be a nurse. I wanted to be a psychologist. My main interest was really looking at the human psyche and how do we think about things and how do we forge relationships and how do we really think about the world. And it was my father who really kind of asked me to pick some kind of a profession that had some security. So nursing, my best friend was in nursing. So I ended up going to college. That was at the time when nurses, especially here in Ontario, Canada, where I live and started my humble beginnings. So it was a secure profession to be in. And what I found was I actually learned a lot about my own gaps in looking at the circle of life. So I was trained as a labor and delivery nurse first, because I figure I like learning. I figure, let me be in the beginning of life, and it's usually more of a happy kind of occasion. And what I found that death also was there as well. Right? It's not that death is not at the presence of birth. I think, again, birth and death are part of that life cycle. And then when I graduated, there was actually no work where I lived. So I had to move across the country to British Columbia. And I spent a few years in BC, and I actually worked in a long-term care home. So I was 24 years old. I was working in a long-term care home. And what I became keenly aware of is that I was lacking a lot of the kind of skills, interpersonal skills, spiritual skills, cross-cultural, cultural perspective skills in what happens when people are dying. Because I think you're probably in the same camp. Death is not a medical event. It's a social event as birth, and it requires a social structure to hold the significance of that particular transition in life, and sometimes requires I guess some of the skills or some of the supports for the medical system. So my learning really began there because I had been at the bedside, 24 years old, and I all of a sudden started to see kind of different things beyond what I was taught. How do I alleviate some of this pain and suffering, which isn't necessarily physical, which is more related to relational, more related to emotional, psycho-spiritual kind of questions that people have. And as a young person, right, I was like, I don't know anything about that. I'm in the height of, getting on, so I can expand my life. And it was a real confrontation, I think, of my own questioning of my own mortality, of my own start of having this death awareness. And so those were the humble beginnings. And I think through all that, there has always been a thread of having an interest in death and dying because of the impact of what I had learned by being privileged enough to be at the bedside, right?
Especially at a young age.
Because it exposed so many of my own gaps. And I've always been a lifelong learner forever. I will be learning. And now I'm feeling, being now 25 years post that humble beginning, I'm at this point of, let me share what I know and what I have learned and what the dying have taught me, what the grievers have taught me. And let's move into more of an aware, knowledgeable culture where we can see the value of the input of the social container that we need for death and dying and grieving.
I love it because, I totally agree with you. I never really thought I would end up in this field. I stumbled into it, never thought I would be in this side of the healthcare system. And, by happenstance and personal experiences, I believe when you're silent and you pause long enough, I do believe your life calls you. And I've tried to resist it for so long until my boyfriend passed away and just my life imploded. And I suddenly felt my grief becoming a mission, and how I lived, because I thought I was living for him as well. So yeah, I totally get that perspective as a young person, as we both have evolved into, wise older people. Because I remember I was telling my dad just the other day about how I thought he was just so silly when I was in my 20s and he would give me great advice. And now here I am in my 40s and I'm thinking, man, that was really good advice. I wish I paid more attention to that. Well, the one thing that is exciting happening in the United States is this new perspective called death doulas. And I know that death doulas are not new. Death education is not new, but it just seems, I don't know if it's the pandemic or it just seems like in the forefront of everyone's mind. And what I found fascinating, that not only are you a nurse or you are really interested in helping people better understand the spectrum of death and dying, but you're a death doula too. And, what I'm finding is when I talk to people who have been trained as death doulas or choose this field as death doula, they all tend to be a little bit different, which I love because, it is not overseen by our government in the United States, which I love, because it's not put in a box. So talk to me a little bit about death doula. What is it? Help us understand what death doula means in Canada. And I'm sure there's some similarities as well.
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple of things that you mentioned, Kimberly, and the one is that the concept of a death doula isn't anything new. When you look at, what does the doula name mean? And oftentimes in the circles that I'm part of, it's referenced sort of a Greek word meaning a woman who's supporting another woman. And fundamentally, it was women who supported other women through birthing, right? So a birth doula, right, which many people have heard about, or birth midwife, with those kinds of things. It's very similar to the death. And as I said, when you look at history, because somehow we've lost the ability to reflect back further enough to see that what we're doing isn't actually anything new. That
right.
we missed, right? We just like, what is this new? This is a new thing. It's like, no, because we've forgotten the fact that birth and death were oftentimes the same, and they still are, right? So when we're looking at even in North America, right, there are those communities that because they're vulnerable from having low socioeconomic status or those kinds of things, or the social determinants of health, birth and death are still one and the same for many communities. So we've kind of forgotten that. So it's reclaiming some of the old ways in a way that is maybe a little bit safer, because maybe there's more people now. And so we need to have a bit more information as death doulas to navigate through a system that, and I mean here a system related to a healthcare system and even the legal system and post-death system, because they're all systems. And if you look at the overarching system, this is called the death system, right? So how do we increase the death literacy? I'm going to use some of those kind of terms so that people have access to and understand how to navigate through all of those different components that they will need to engage in when they're dying, when they die, and post-death. And this is part of what we're trying to create is train those folks and give them good information so they can help others navigate a system that can oftentimes be confusing. So death doulas here in Canada, kind of, they can call yourself a death doula, a Thanatology, an end-of-life supporter. It isn't a protected name, such as a nurse or a doctor, those kinds of things, or even a psychotherapist here in Ontario specifically. Again, some of those are very much governed by the legal systems or associations, right? So we're working with all of those different systems to try and carve out opportunities for people to engage in some kind of training that can either, because this is my exposure, my experience of who are coming to the training. So they're coming people who want to know. They want to know how to navigate this a bit differently. They may have had exposures that may not have been very good. So, quote unquote, they may have had a bad death experience, or they're trying to really, maybe they had a bad death experience in the healthcare system or those kinds of things. So they're trying to gain some more information so they can, again, decrease some of that pain and suffering and the uncertainty of it, right? And oftentimes in healthcare, and I can only speak from the Canadian perspective because we sometimes see it as, but we have it here, everybody's covered. But you only get the information that sometimes the providers may feel that you need. Where, we're not given all the information because it's sometimes guarded by the keepers, the providers of that information. Not always, but in sort of general terms. And so people want to better prepare. But how do I prepare if I don't have the knowledge, if I don't have the info? So part of that death doula role is to provide the emotional support, but also the practical support. How do we navigate? How do we advocate? How do I ask for this? Is it even allowable? I have conversations with clients saying, I want to crawl into the bed with the person. I'm like, of course, ask. Let's, negotiate the spaces. It's a lot harder now with some of the guidelines and precautions related to COVID. And so it makes it even that much more challenging. But I think people are coming to understand that they need to have this information in order for them to advocate for themselves and then to create a change, right? I think in Canada, we sometimes look at death positivity in the States and some of the leaders that are out there. And we love you guys. So, you and Caitlin Doty and some of the other folks, Suzanne O'Brien and Deanna Cochran and Karen Wyatt, right? Here I am, right? All the folks. And then we're up here in Canada going, hey, we're doing some really cool stuff too.
Absolutely. And yes, you are. Yes, you are. You brought up death literacy. Throughout my history in this field, I call it med speak in the death world. And the crazy thing is, I am not a clinician by background. I'm a creative. But I tell people I was raised by hospice nurses because I started in my late 20s and left in my 40s. And so they really taught me, that med speak and how I could turn around and interpret certain things for the community members. Because we use really unfamiliar words in this field, and it's unrecognizable. So I do believe death literacy is a huge part. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know until it's way too late, and that to me is heartbreaking. For sure. Now, of course, you created this Dying Matters Canada. I've been following you for, I should say, stalking you for many, many years, and I know that's crazy to say, but it's you really have a wealth of information that you're doing under Death Matters Canada, and I just like that. Dying matters in Canada, but I love that whole Dying Matters, and that kind of, it does matter. It's probably just like birth; it's a very essential beginning, and death is just that period at the end of the sentence. But what do you hope for Dying Matters, and what do you hope to accomplish under that?
Wow. Okay. So thank you so much. Humble beginnings. I'm getting lots of reflections too. I've had a conversation with a person who's involved in sort of publishing and those kinds of things. And one of the things that she said to me was that actually the website that I created and my vision actually doesn't hold a lot of my own self in it. So this is my personal task, is to put a lot more of me into it, to say, this is me, this is, why I'm doing this. And I think the main reason I kind of mirrored Dying Matters on Dying Matters that it already exists in the UK as a network fundamentally looking at death education. So 5 years ago, when I started this endeavor, sort of, I'm going to give it my all, that having that death awareness going, if you don't do it now, what happens, when you ran out of time, and, time's knocking, so keep going. And so I kind of mirrored what they were doing with the hopes of bringing out this death education. And as you can imagine, what I found was that it's a hard sell. Death and dying is a hard sell. And so I had this wonderful vision of, in life, dying matters, and we need to talk about these issues. And now I'm seeing that now there's a little bit more of an uptake, right? So what I see in the future is potentially engaging a lot of the death doulas that I have trained through the different programs and some of the other ways that people have come into know me, to arm them with education so that they can really educate and advocate for and empower their own families, themselves, their communities. So that's my big vision, right? Death literacy across Canada, maybe a road trip, maybe an RV involved, and a couple of dogs.
Come on, yeah. Hey,
totally.
Yeah, why not?
Totally. So it might be, something bridging the gaps too, Kim and Olga, and then we go across North America. Maybe just virtually. I don't know. But, I think sometimes, again, if I kind of date myself a little bit, I grew up on watching Oprah and watching women, Marianne Williamson, and in the age of spiritual awakening, I think we're now at the spiritual renaissance, where we're kind of going, we're in this cycle again. And so based on those kinds of things, I have no idea where this is going to go, right? I hope that it goes, again, my hope and dream is that the death doulas will be armed with good information so they can support people in their own community, and so that we can shift, right? We can create that social action where we give people realistic choices and options. So this isn't about you can have everything and you're dying. This is about a realistic, humbled, relationship. I coined a term that I like to use called relational autonomy. So it's this notion that, especially for those of us who have some sense of, I want to have some sense of self-autonomy and freedom, I also have to know that I live in a social structure, whether it's my family or that community. And so we need to be aware of what is my desire and my wish for my dying and my death and my post-death in the context of what is available, what do I have access to, who can work with me, right? Sometimes I hear, even in the news, right? People want to say, I want to have my whole body give up for a donation, and I want to have a sky burial, right? So we need to get real.
Yeah, right.
Reality to say, I wish for that for you too, but maybe there's some tweaking that we need to do because some of it isn't grounded in the reality of what is. So how do we find that balance, right? I think I'm searching a balance in my own life, and I'm hopefully I'm guiding the death doulas or those folks who are learning from me about death education. I'm grounding them in some reality so that we can encompass all of it, the emotional part of it, the physical part of it, the mental part of it, and the spiritual aspect. So it's not one or the other, but creates that holistic framework so that we really are helping that individual that find themselves inside of that bubble, literally, right, of the people that support them.
I love that.
So that's my hope.
I think you're already doing it. And you know, as a, you know, stalker of yours, I think you are putting a lot of great information out there, and you're making a huge difference. The interesting thing about where I live and where you live, a capital system versus a socialized system, is the healthcare tends to be different, extremely different. So it makes me want to ask, do people in Canada die differently under a socialized system? You know, we're capitalist, so we're always looking where can we make money. And I've found it hard to see people making money on the dying. That to me is it's a gray area. And so I love that with Canada, you bring this new perspective. So talk to us a little bit about that. A socialized system, end of life. And do you guys really die differently in Canada versus the United States?
So I would probably say in my somewhat pseudo-informed mind, what I would say is people die differently depending on who they are, where they live, and their worldview construct, or even where they find themselves in the class, right? Let's look at all of those different variables. So absolutely, I think people die differently even in the province of Ontario because of these kind of individualistic, or the way in which the life circumstances, right? I think what we might want to look at is what's our approach? So what's our approach to care? And I think that that's where it crosses across all of the different ways in which the healthcare is funded, because I think let's go beyond that. So I think fundamentally hospice palliative care, if we join those two together, encompassing what we can do when a person is living with a terminal illness and how they may suffer through the signs and symptoms, let's say even of their treatment, right? Let's be real that sometimes the treatment are oftentimes the causes of suffering, and that's a whole other philosophical question in relation to quality of life and who gets to decide, and this 50 Shades of Death and Dying.
Yeah,
I love a book to come, right? So you got to look at that. So absolutely, because there's going to be difference. And I oftentimes, and again, I'm only going to be able to relate to my knowledge and my personal experience. When I train people and they come from, let's say, just this particular province, they have various different experiences of being with somebody who has died because of maybe where they live, right? There are differences in rural and urban. If you live in a large city, you're going to have more people and more opportunity for more care, for having more places where you can die, where you will have more variability. Where if you live in a rural setting where maybe, the population, there is not as much money, much of that will come on, maybe by volunteers, right? So it depends on where you are. I think there's also a myth that the Canadian system, because it's, socialized under paying our taxpayers, somehow isn't capitalistic in nature, but it is. It's always in relationship to the bottom line. Where is the money going and how do we, right? So are we putting a lot of money into here or a lot of money into here? Where is the money being distributed? Right? And so there are variables there. I spent a number of years embedded into the bureaucracy, and how do we decide? How do we shuffle the money around? And oftentimes begging for change related to end of life care, because again, when you look at the worldview and social construct of our Western world, it's not a place where we want to go and look at. It's not necessarily a place where we want to spend a lot of time and investing money. Now we're being called to task to say, are we taking care of those that are most vulnerable? We're not. So now we'll have to kind of rejig this. And those are going to be some really big questions, right? We're going to have a very different understanding through this pandemic experience of what other pains and suffering people have. And then enabling them to find the balance, to say, I would rather spend my time engaging in life and smooching people rather than keeping myself safe so I don't get sicker than I already am.
I'm right there with you.
Really big questions.
Yes. And you made a really great point about a socialized system really somewhat being, capitalistic in some aspects. And even a capitalized system, my dad's like, I don't believe in socialized medicine. I was like, Dad, you have Medicare. And that's kind of our form of socialized medicine in the big scheme of things, because it's a system, which is they distribute and they deny and I believe there's tweaks in both systems that might even reflect each other that people are not aware of. What's interesting to me after so many years in this field, there's always something that still surprises me. That someone may maybe not know, and it's been talked about when I'm working in the field for years and years. So I guess I'm interested as like a seasoned end of life educator. What surprises you most when it comes to end of life in your specific community?
So my surprise yesterday came to the realization, and maybe it's something that's been looping, is that there's a lot of information available. There are some really great resources out there. I just found a particular good end of life resource in sort of education in Australia, offering free online stuff, right? So that's an interesting thing to me, is that there is a lot of information that those of us are out there. Sometimes I call the death doulas sleeper cells until the time we need them, and then they will rise up to the occasion, because that's oftentimes how we work. But again, and maybe I'm not surprised. I mean, again, there aren't a lot of us who, want to talk about this. And I think one of the things that I didn't realize is that, being a death educator or working in this field, while though it can be really heavy, it can be really impactful on your own personal life, to the point where there's even misunderstandings in some of your relationships, where what I'm doing, I see as a positive. I see as being optimistic, that I have the ability to disseminate knowledge and change. And yet my family might still see this as a very dark, kind of work. And so that surprises me, is sometimes the perception of why we're doing this work and what we're after, right? Again, I think, but it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't, right? Because we're still human beings and we're still unsure about things. I think we're forever going to be unsure about the things that we don't know anything about, right? And death is a great unknown. It's a great uncertainty. I always try to look at death education as a way of helping people to build resilience at the time of change, right? So if we look at death as one of the big change events, right? It impacts every single aspect, everything in our life. But I also look at that, that we have losses all the time, right? Our own human walk through life is always death change. So how do we build resilience, knowing that maybe something that we consider bad or something that we consider being really impactful is going to happen? And how do we build resilience so we can be with it, right? And make allowance, or not allowance, the wrong word, make space for maybe those people who can't, who don't have the ability to do that. And it's okay. It's not to put resilience over fragility. It's just to recognize that we're not all on the same wave, and that there's learning on all kinds of different levels. It didn't really answer your question, Kimberly, because it depends.
Yeah, it really does. Recently, I was at a dinner party and around a table, and everybody was commenting about how chippy I am. You laugh a lot, and I'm like, yeah, I just have fun, and they were like, well, why are you like that? And I just announced, I was like, because I'm okay with my death, and it silenced the complete table, and everybody was like, what, what, and I believe the more in-depth relationship that I have with my own mortality, it sort of wakes my spirit and allows it to come alive to live more boldly today, knowing that that this is not guaranteed for tomorrow. It pushes me to get up early and see the sunrise, or because it might be my last. And when you live like that, suddenly things that didn't have much meaning become really extraordinarily important. And
Absolutely.
That's how I feel in some aspects. Now, what's really exciting about Canada is that you guys never stop evolving. And what's really cool is you guys are having this new like Death Doula Ontario network. Is a new community. And so what does that mean, the Death Doula Ontario network? What do you hope to accomplish?
So again, it was something I created this summer, actually, looking at the fact that we didn't necessarily have an opportunity to meet in person, right? So I have, through the different contracts that I've had with colleges and teaching specifically end-of-life doulas, and also Thanatology and some of the other things that I have done, I find that there's a need for us to come together, to have a forum where we can talk about, because talk about death and dying, talk about how do we do this work, how do we create social action, and I wanted to provide some guidance and some support, and also the ability of those folks to network, because what I had seen over the last 2 years when I would gather people together, they would be so ecstatic that they have now found people that are like them, that they were, feeling a little bit more okay with the fact that they were seen as being abnormal, right? Oftentimes it's like, nobody wants to talk about this, and here are my people that want to talk about this. So I wanted to enhance more of that camaraderie, coming together, recognize it that we all come from different perspectives, and we may have different viewing points of how we want people to, die well and those kinds of things. But it was a way for us to come together and continue the education. There was also a very pragmatic thing that I wanted to ensure that I had, that the doulas, because this is what would keep me up at night, thinking to myself, I trained all these people and I don't really know if they really got what I was trying to say, and what if there's a potential of harm. And that was a real concern for me, because they're right now, there is no certified end-of-life doula. This is education that you can buy, that you can engage in. There isn't a governing body. And so in some way, I wanted to create a little bit of a safety place where we can negotiate that and work together on having liability insurance. How do we, because it's a very different way of practicing end-of-life care support. It's not supported within the system, and it may not be, right? Those are some of the questions. So how do we enterprise this into, right now, only maybe a privileged position where only those that have the money to pay can pay. But I'll tell you, there's also doulas there that are integrating a lot of this knowledge into what they're already doing. So there are folks who are working with communities with LGBTQI2S communities. They are inside of that community that needs so much of this knowledge because it's not easily accessible, right? Even the construct of a family and what does that mean? Then there are those who are working with disability clients. How do we also support families and support groups, right? How do we do that? So it was a way to bring them together to say, you're not alone, and this is how we're going to forge. And because I live in Ontario, I'm more so aware of the legalities related to this province. So it's sort of provincial specific, but we have friends from other places that come in. Again, I'm part of the administrator facilitator of this network, but I'm really looking at how can we grow this together. So it could go beyond me, right? At one point saying, okay, somebody else needs to hand it off. Right now, it's a little premature baby that I'm coddling, maybe a little bit too much, but who knows? Again,
Who knows?
It could transform. It could transform. It could end up being the death educators, right? Because this is right now what I'm strongly suggesting is, you've learned something. Now it's time for you to share this with other people, right? And then clients will come from that. Forge what you need from this so that it can still uphold. If you're going to use end of life doula or death doula, we want to maintain that pseudo professional name and what it means, but also there's other knowledge that we can utilize in the community and fun ways of doing it. Death cafes and dialogues or death chats. Let's talk about death, baby. Right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the things that nobody wants to talk about.
Right.
And it is about bringing humor into it. I bring a lot of humor into my teaching because I think it also can get so heavy. So heavy, right? Where we need to kind of, let's break this open. Let's have some fun with it because, and even, when you talked about, I live my life, laughter, and it takes work. Like there are times when I have to put on the music, do my cry, and then do my dance and do my songs because I'm trying to shift all of the stuff inside of myself. Absolutely.
So can anyone join your network?
Well, right now it's specifically more so for somebody who's had some formal training. And so somebody who may have gone through, right, some form of, and because there are different programs and different ways that people come to that knowledge. I'm specifically focusing on Ontario because, again, looking at how to build this network within this particular province, right? Because there is, we also in Canada have the End of Life Doula Association of Canada. So it's overarching. That's more, I look at that as more of an association, looking at professionalizing the role potentially, where for me, the network right now is doula-led and, what are we going to talk about? And the number one thing that all of them have said through a survey, and I think we have about almost close to 80 members since June.
Wow.
And what they've talked about is public awareness and public education. So speaking about death literacy, speaking about what this means, putting online Zoom calls, doing death cafes, getting people out. So again, we can flood with all kinds of knowledge around death and dying and what people need to know from their community.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. So where can people find you?
Well, they can find me on DyingMatters.ca, although I'm kind of not present there yet. I'm just building the part about me website. And, I, like many other people, will just Google a name if I'm interested in someone and see what comes up, see what's in the public sphere. So DyingMatters.ca, you can Google my name. I do have a little bit of a YouTube channel where I have some snippets and some things that I have done. Again, it's one of those things when I'm thinking to myself, well, am I ever going to be ready to put myself out there? And I think I'm doing that, right? Bit by bit, because I'm continually changing. I'm transforming all the time. There's a core that's always been there, but I think I'm adapting to the environment. What are people looking for? What do they want to know? In what kind of way, right? We have to be very adaptive.
That's great. That's really fabulous. Well, I can't tell you and express to you how much you have taught me in the past 20 minutes, but also through the years that I've followed you on social media, and I keep doing this really great work. And just know I'm a supporter right here in the United States, and whatever I can do to support your efforts in Canada, please know that you have a great following down in the States as well.
That's so awesome to hear. Thank you so much, Kimberly. This is fantastic.
So what I would love to do now is I'm starting kind of an overflow with my podcast guest, and I'm coming back on, and it will be a little bit of a video for my YouTube channel. And what I'm trying to do is really take a couple of questions out that we don't talk about in the podcast, but that way they can see you. But what I'm really thinking, if you would like to participate, is I would love to chat about now that we've finished the podcast. It really is about COVID-19 right now. For some reason, COVID is looked at as such a negative thing, and it is. It's horrible. We've all been isolated and quarantined. But yet I see so many things evolving around our field, death and dying, that's coming to the forefront because of a pandemic. And I guess I just wanted to ask you is, what are the things that you see that are coming out of this pandemic that's sort of positive in our field?
So I think there's probably two things. One is that there's more of an uptake for people to come online and to learn in this way. And I think one of the real gifts from this because I worried about whether or not this way of disseminating some death education would fail to enable people to connect in a very intimate way. So oftentimes I say to people, this is going to touch you personally because you're going to be confronted with your own mortality. This is going to touch your family because you're going to start hopefully talking about these things, and so on and so on. So it's going to have an impact. And so I oftentimes will say we get very intimate very, very quickly. And so I was very happy that my experience in teaching, that there wasn't the loss of that intimacy through this particular medium. Actually, I think it might have brought it even closer because we weren't in hotels rooms. We weren't in a conference room. We weren't in a classroom. We were actually in each other's home so that I could, I would see the cat and the dog and I would see the husband go by, and it became much more intimate in that way. And I think so there's opportunity then for me, as I think into the future, to have family meetings using Zoom or some kind of a virtual platform. I have spoken, I converse a lot with families who are in Europe using Skype, and I have been for 10 years. So I'm used to it. I'm really, right. So I think that it's very quickly we can adapt to that technology where it wasn't necessarily as quickly. I remember having a conversation with somebody 5 years ago around live streaming funerals and how he was trying to get into the business to provide live streaming support services for funeral, and how he was getting shot down. Well, here we are, booming, streaming funerals and different ways that people can connect. Right? This is the real opportunity here. If I may not have the opportunity to go and maybe visit a family member that's somewhere far away, I can now be able to be connected through the camera, to be present, right? Because the brain doesn't necessarily know virtual and reality, right? It takes stimulation in that way, right? So I think that there's an opportunity to do just this, that we can raise awareness, that make it accessible to a lot more people. Obviously, we need to be conscientious of the people who may not have access to this form, right? Because the connectivity is also an issue. So, and the other is that I'm seeing that, again, there's more of an uptake, right? So there's maybe because of COVID, there is that, whoa, this cat, I could die, right? I think it's gone a little bit further where now we're shaming people. It's like, you will die, or it's like,
right.
Hold on a second. Now we're using it the other way. So I think that it will reveal some of the somebody used a really good term, and I forget it, like a wit idiot. So not people that are, without awareness, but maybe people that might get caught up into some of the things without some critical thinking, right? I think we are asked now to do some more critical thinking. I'm hoping that that's what it will provide as a way of saying, okay, and again, that tension between the social and the individual. Right. So my 92-year-old mother who has dementia may not be able to understand COVID and the restrictions, and to what degree, right? to what degree do we enable that engagement, looking at risk for who, what kind of risk, weigh the pros and cons. Hopefully, we're thinking about some of those kinds of things.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for your contribution and joining the Overflow family. And that way people get to see you and it's just not audio. So I appreciate your very articulate viewpoint when it comes to what COVID is doing to our field and evolving our field in a lot of different ways. So thank you. And again, thanks for being a guest on the podcast, and we'll keep in touch.
So awesome. Thank you so much, Kimberly. It's fantastic.
All right. Any other questions before I let you go?
You have somebody that does your editing for you, or do you do it yourself?
I do. No, I do. Okay. I don't love that part. He doesn't do a lot of editing, but he can get in there, and there's a lot of guests that will do a lot of pausing and thinking, and I take those sort of things out. We try to be very conscious of not manipulating a conversation, because you can in the editing field. So we take out some ums, and it's mostly him editing me and giving me pointers and things like that. But yeah, he does a lot of my editing behind the scenes. Jason Andre with 7 Season Films, and I've passed his name on to other people too, and so he's working with them. But he's really a coach because he'll call me out of the blue if he's editing. He's like, "You sucked on this podcast. You're killing me." I was like, good to know. And he keeps me really grounded. But we go back to, I've known him 15 years. We used to surf in Costa Rica together, and sort of, he feels like a younger brother. So I love having someone like that in my life who's not going to not say something because it might hurt my feelings. He's very upfront, and he says certain things, critical, specific things to make me only better. So we sort of have that relationship.
Yeah, that's good. We need people like that, right?
Yeah, we do. We do. Absolutely. And yes, we do. Especially me, to call me out, and because I can get so excited. I was just on a phone call the other day, and this lady is new to the field, and she goes, "You're excited about your casket that you're making into a bookshelf you're going to lay in when you're dead." And I'm like, "I know, isn't that crazy?" And she's like, "You're crazy." So
I dug my own grave.
Yeah, you did,
and slept in it. Mm-hmm.
Oh my, so it's nice not to feel so weird about it, and I do want a relationship with my death, and not I want it planned out, but if it doesn't go that way, then life changes. For instance, I never really wanted a funeral, and as I've grown in this field, I realized the funeral wasn't for me, and so I was like, in my will and advanced directives, I said, "Look, I'm really not interested in a funeral, but if people need that,
absolutely.
I will absolutely love to be honored. But I don't need that." And so that might be something that I've learned along the way too. So, hey, so how can we should collaborate on some things and what we could chat about? I mean, whether it's me helping with your virtual expo coming up, or whatever I can do, keep me in the loop, and I'll definitely let you know once we get the registrations for speakers up with this expo, beautiful expo. Diane, I'll send the link your way. Because I love the perspective of Canada and other cultures, because we can always learn from them how we can implement some of that within our own communities too. So hopefully by next Tuesday, the website will be up, so you'll be hearing from me.
And you want another interesting thing? So I'm also part of the Medical Cannabis Educator Association of Canada. We're just developing this new association. Yeah, I've just completed university training in cannabis and how to potentially use some of that for end of life, and looking at, how do we even have psilocybin as a way of alleviating some restlessness and anxiety, or how we can use the teacher plants for ourselves to get a little bit more insight in a way that isn't about, let me get out of this headspace that I hate being in, but, how can we form all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So that could be.
I think I'm the only person in the world that is allergic to cannabis.
Is that right?
It closes my throat.
Huh. Interesting. So
the smoke does.
Do you have a ragweed allergy? Or some kind of maybe there must be some kind of an allergy that the strain has.
Yeah, I do, but yet, because of my lack of experience, I was in Las Vegas over Christmas, and my cousin came from North Carolina. She goes, I need edibles, and so I can take them back to North Carolina because it's not legal there. And she got cookies, and I ended up. I was going to a meeting downstairs, and so I ate a whole cookie. I thought I was not even anywhere near the earth. And my cousin came back and said, hey, or did you feel the effects of the cookie? I'm like, yeah, I ate the whole thing. And she goes, what? You're only supposed to take a bite. I'm like, then why don't they make pieces? I mean, yeah, it's like, then make it a quarter. One cookie, one serving. I mean, I was like high as a kite. And to the point that the people I were meeting with, because Hilton was a sponsor of my Live Well, Die Well tour. The guys that were giving me this tour around this whole Hilton. He had a Scooby-Doo pin on, and he kept going in and out. He totally knew I was baked. and my throat was like really tight.
So there's got to be something in there. Interesting.
Yeah. But just like a friend the other day, he had a mint, and I was having a really bad day the other day, and I keep it in my hand of that one little mint in the hand of my Buddha, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to take that today, and it was fine. I felt like a little bit like nice. So it might be the amount that I might be taking versus an allergic. But I will say, if I puff on a pipe, my throat it has more reaction.
And I guess it's part of it. I mean, the dry, the salivations dry up, right? Everything comes in.
Yeah.
And then your belly kind of expands when you go, whoa, what is this? Right? Those
and it makes me paranoid.
It can. It can again, set and setting. What's the set? What's the mindset? And then what's the setting? That's all going to trigger stuff because your mind's being open to more stimulation. Your whole endocannabinoid system is like, whoa, what are we paying attention to today? Right? So when you do
that's
something
a great
like that,
point.
you want to be in the woods. You want to be connecting and spending 4 hours watching a strawberry.
That is a great. Well, I mean, in college, everybody's like, "Hey, choke on this," and I ended up being in the back seat. My dad's Virginia State Police, and so I ruined their back seat because I heard the police siren, and I wanted to get in the trunk to hide. And I mean, it cost me money to repair their back seat. That's how crazy I was. Like, no, they're coming to get me, my dad. So I've always had this kind of aloof relationship because of that one specific incident. But yeah, it's I need to like you say, be more prepared and get in the setting and put myself in that open-mindedness. Good tips. But
that'll be part of my next thing is doing some kind of counseling, right? Because I'm in the same boat, right? I had an experience when I was 19. Oh, hell no, I'm not doing that anymore. Didn't get reintroduced to cannabis until I was in my 40s and went, oh, this is interesting. And the person who introduced me kind of guided me through the process of small little bits where now, right, it's like being, okay, let's play with this. And I know I have enough anecdotal or experiential and now more learned kind of knowledge to have to be able to provide a bit more guidance to people. And now looking at psilocybin too, right? Those are the conversations that we're having. It's so much fun at the meeting with the cannabis ladies, because it's all ladies. The cannabis educators are like, what's your substance this morning? And they're like, oh, I'm having a little mushroom tea, and I'm having a little doobie here, and I'm having a little cookie here. It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Oh, that's so great. That's so great. You know what I love is it's not as taboo as what it used to be. And that's what, because it is I'm related to it because it's a natural thing. And so it's an herb, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, thank you so much for chatting. But when you get up and running and starting to educate people on this cannabis, I think that's a whole nother podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I totally do.
But that's a whole other education. So the new thing that we're putting out, so across Canada, it's called Educanonation. Educanonation. So that's what
we're doing. It.
We're gathering the association together, getting all the educators together, and then that's gonna be our product that we're gonna spread across Canada.
That's awesome. Well, look, have a great day. I'll let you know when this podcast is up and running, and if there's anything that comes up, shoot me an email and vice versa. Okay. Especially next week with that beautiful Dying Expo coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for your time. Bye. It's nice to see your face too.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, you're the designer. This podcast is produced by Jason Andre with 7 Season